The sound of a baby's cough pierced the cold Montana night, sending shivers down Fiona Grey's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn chill seeping through the cabin walls. She pressed a cool cloth to her 7-month-old daughter's forehead, her heart twisting as little Abigail's face contorted with another painful cough. "Hush now, sweet girl," Fiona whispered, her voice trembling as she rocked the feverish infant. "Mama's here. Mama's not going anywhere." Fort Benton, Montana Territory, 1876, was supposed to be her fresh start after her husband Daniel's death in a mining accident 6 months earlier. The frontier town nestled along the Missouri River had promised opportunity, a place where a young widow could build a new life with her baby girl. She'd purchased this small cabin on the outskirts of town with what little savings they had left, taking in mending and laundry to make ends meet. But now, as Abigail's illness entered its 3rd day with no signs of improvement, Fort Benton felt like a prison of isolation. Fiona glanced at the small clock on the mantel, nearly midnight. Abigail's fever had spiked again, her tiny chest heaving with each labored breath. The herbal remedies Fiona had tried: willow bark tea, honey with lemon, cool compresses had done nothing to break the fever or ease the terrible cough that rattled her baby's chest. She needed a doctor. Hammond, Fort Benton's only physician, had refused to come when she'd gone to his office earlier that day. "I don't make house calls to the outskirts, especially for women who can't pay proper fees," he'd said dismissively, barely looking up from his ledger. "Give the child some whiskey and warm water and let her sleep it off. Please," Fiona had begged. "I'll find a way to pay. She's burning with fever." "Come back when you have money," was his only response before turning to attend to the wife of a wealthy merchant. Desperation had driven her to the homes of neighbors, but most doors remained firmly shut. Some cited their own children's health as reason enough not to risk exposure. Others simply didn't want to get involved with the widow woman who kept to herself. Only Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman 3 cabins down, had offered sympathy and a jar of pine tar syrup, but it hadn't helped. Abigail's cry grew more pitiful, her little body burning against Fiona's chest. "What am I going to do?" Fiona whispered, tears streaming down her face. She had no horse, no way to reach Helena where another doctor practiced. The stagecoach wouldn't come through for another 3 days. By then, she couldn't finish the thought. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Fiona clutched Abigail closer, wary of visitors at this late hour. Fort Benton might be more civilized than some frontier towns, but it still had its share of unsavory characters. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady despite her fear. "Nathan Calloway, madam. I board at Mrs. Peterson's. She sent me to check on you and the little one." Fiona hesitated, then shifted Abigail to one arm and unlatched the door with her free hand, opening it just enough to see the visitor's face. The man standing on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the open sky. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Trail dust covered his denim pants and flannel shirt, and a gun belt hung at his hip, the unmistakable look of a cowboy. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned your little one was sick," he said, his deep voice gentle. His eyes, a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin, moved to Abigail's flushed face. "Sounds like she's having a hard time breathing." Fiona nodded, struggling to hold back tears. "She is. Dr. Hammond refused to come. I don't know what to do." Nathan's expression hardened at the mention of the doctor. "May I come in, Mrs. Grey, Fiona Grey, and yes, please." She stepped back, allowing him inside the small cabin. It wasn't proper to invite a strange man into her home, especially at this hour, but propriety meant nothing compared to Abigail's life. Nathan removed his hat as he entered, revealing more of his dark hair. He couldn't have been more than 30, Fiona guessed, though the frontier aged men quickly. His movements were careful as he approached, studying the wheezing child with concern. "How long has she been sick?" he asked. 3 days now. It started with just a cough, but since yesterday she's been burning up. She can hardly breathe and she stopped taking milk." Fiona's voice broke. "Doctor." Hammond wouldn't even look at her. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Hammond's a fool who cares more about money than medicine." He hesitated, then asked, "May I?" At Fiona's nod, he gently placed a calloused hand on Abigail's forehead. The baby stirred weakly at the touch, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. "That's a dangerous fever," he said, his expression grave. "And that cough sounds like it could be lung fever." Fiona's heart sank. She'd heard of lung fever pneumonia, some called it taking children quickly. "What can I do? Is there anything?" Nathan straightened, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "There's a doctor in Sun River about 40 miles west, a good one. Dr. Elizabeth Wilson. She trained back east before coming out here with her husband. He was killed by raiders 2 years back, but she stayed on." 40 miles, Fiona whispered, despair washing over her. "I have no way to get there." "I do." Nathan settled his hat back on his head. "I'll ride for her. My horse is fresh, and I can make it there and back by tomorrow evening if I push hard." Fiona stared at him in disbelief. "You do that? For strangers?" Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, a memory, perhaps, or old pain. "No child should suffer for lack of help, Mrs. Grey. I've seen too much of that in my life." "I can't pay you much," she began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "We'll worry about that later. Right now, your little girl needs medicine." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Keep her fever down as best you can, lukewarm water, not cold. And try to get her to take sips of water if she'll have it." Fiona nodded, hope kindling for the first time in days. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Nathan," he corrected gently, "and I haven't done anything yet." His eyes softened as they rested briefly on Abigail's feverish face. "What's her name?" "Abigail, she's 7 months old. She's a fighter, Mrs. Grey. You can see it in her. Hold on to that." With that, he was gone, his footsteps fading quickly as he strode toward the stables. Fiona closed the door and returned to her rocking chair by the stove, cradling Abigail against her chest. "Did you hear that, sweet girl?" she whispered. "Help is coming, you just need to hold on." Outside, Nathan saddled his dun gelding, Thunder, with practiced efficiency. The horse sensed his urgency, standing still as Nathan tightened the cinch and secured his saddlebags. 40 miles tonight, old friend," he murmured to the horse. "It's going to be a hard ride." Mrs. Peterson emerged from her cabin, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. "You're going for the doctor, then?" Nathan nodded, checking his pistol before securing it in his holster. "The one in Sun River." The old woman's eyes widened. "That's a day's ride each way and in the dark. I know these trails. I'll make good time." He mounted Thunder in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle. "That poor woman's been through enough," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "Lost her husband not long after they arrived in the territory. She's been raising that baby alone, working herself to the bone." Nathan's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes shifted. "I'll bring back help, Mrs. Peterson. You have my word." With a touch of his hat brim, he urged Thunder forward, the horses' hooves kicking up dust as they headed west out of Fort Benton. The moon was 3/4 full, providing just enough light to navigate the familiar trail. If he pushed hard, he could reach Sun River by dawn. As Fort Benton fell away behind him, Nathan's mind returned to the image of Fiona Grey, her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders, green eyes wide with worry as she cradled her sick child. There had been no wedding ring on her finger, though Mrs. Peterson had mentioned she was a widow. Not that it mattered. Nathan had learned long ago that getting involved with women, especially women with children, led only to heartache. His job was simple: bring back the doctor, ensure the child received treatment, and move on. In 2 weeks, he'd be heading south with a cattle drive anyway, leaving Montana behind for the winter. The trail narrowed as it wound alongside the Missouri River. In daylight, the view would be spectacular, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the river carving its ancient path through the landscape. Now, shadows stretched across the path, and the only sounds were Thunder's steady breathing and the rhythmic beat of hooves against hard, packed earth. Nathan's thoughts drifted to his own childhood in Kansas, watching his baby sister waste away from a fever while his father searched desperately for a doctor. By the time medical help arrived, little Sarah had been gone for hours. The memory still burned, even 20 years later. No, he wouldn't let another child die if he could help it. Thunder maintained a steady pace through the night, the miles falling away beneath his hooves. They crossed 2 streams, the water splashing up to Nathan's boots, and navigated around a rockslide that had partially blocked the trail since the last time he'd traveled this way. As the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Nathan spotted the scattered buildings of Sun River in the distance. The small settlement served as a trading post and gathering place for ranchers from the surrounding area. Dr. Wilson's cabin stood on the northern edge, marked by the small sign that read simply, Dr. Thunder was lathered and breathing hard as Nathan reined him in front of the cabin. He dismounted stiffly, his muscles protesting after hours in the saddle. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing a woman in her 40s with gray, streaked brown hair pulled into a tight bun. "You're riding early, Cowboy," she said, eyeing his exhausted horse. "Emergency, I take it, Dr. Wilson?" At her nod, he continued, "I'm Nathan Calloway. There's a baby in Fort Benton with lung fever. Mother's a widow, name of Grey. Doctor there refused to help." Dr. Wilson's expression hardened. "Hammond, I'm not surprised." She glanced at the sky, then back at Nathan. "You've ridden all night?" "Yes, madam," she nodded briskly. "Give me 10 minutes to gather my supplies and saddle my horse. There's water for yours by the side of the house." True to her word, within 10 minutes Dr. Wilson emerged with saddlebags full of medical supplies and a determined expression. She was dressed practically in a split riding skirt and sturdy boots, her medical bag secured to her saddle. "We'll need to pace ourselves," she said as they set off. "Your horse can't maintain the same speed for the return journey." Nathan nodded, knowing she was right. Thunder was strong, but even the best horse had limits. The baby's in bad shape, high fever, struggling to breathe. "How old?" 7 months. Dr. Wilson's lips pressed into a tight line. "Pneumonia's dangerous at that age. Let's make the best time we can without killing our horses." They rode steadily through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take sips of water. Dr. Wilson proved to be an excellent rider, keeping pace without complaint despite the grueling journey. "You said the mother's a widow?" she asked during one such break. "That's what I was told. Seems she's been in Fort Benton less than a year. Raising a child alone on the frontier is no small feat," Dr. Wilson remarked, her eyes distant. "I understand something of that life." Nathan remembered Mrs. Peterson mentioning the doctor's husband had been killed. "I heard about your loss, madam. I'm sorry." She acknowledged this with a slight nod. 2 years next month. The territory needs doctors more than it needs grieving widows, so I stayed." They continued their journey as the sun climbed higher, the autumn day growing surprisingly warm. Nathan estimated they were making good time, but still, anxiety gnawed at him. What if they were too late? What if the baby's condition had worsened overnight? "You care a great deal for people you've just met," Dr. Wilson observed as they navigated a particularly rocky stretch of trail. Nathan kept his eyes on the path ahead, just doing what's right. "Most men would say that, then ride in the opposite direction," she replied with a knowing look. "Especially when there's little chance of payment." He didn't respond. The truth was, he couldn't explain it himself, the fierce urgency that had gripped him when he'd seen that sick baby in Fiona Grey's arms. Perhaps it was the memory of his sister. Or perhaps it was something in Fiona's eyes, that mixture of determination and desperation that spoke of a woman who would fight to the death for her child, but who was terrified of fighting alone. Back in Fort Benton, Fiona struggled through the longest night of her life. Abigail's fever continued to rage despite the lukewarm compresses. Twice, the baby's breathing became so labored that Fiona feared the worst, holding her own breath until Abigail's tiny chest rose again. As dawn broke, Mrs. Peterson arrived with a pot of broth and a concerned expression. "How is she?" the older woman asked, her eyes going immediately to the baby. "No better," Fiona admitted, her voice hoarse from a night without sleep. "Maybe worse." Mrs. Peterson set down the pot and approached, laying a gnarled hand gently on Abigail's cheek. "Poor little lamb, but she's still fighting, and that's what matters." "Do you think he'll really bring a doctor?" Fiona couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. In her experience, people rarely followed through on promises, especially when those promises involved personal sacrifice. "Nathan Calloway is many things," Mrs. Peterson said firmly, "but he's not a man who makes empty promises. If he said he'd bring help, he will or die trying. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they sent a chill through Fiona. The thought of this man risking his life for her daughter, possibly dying on the dangerous trail, added a new layer of worry. "I don't even know him," she whispered. "Why would he do this, Mrs.?" Peterson busied herself with pouring a cup of broth. "Nathan doesn't talk much about his past, but I know he lost family when he was young, his sister, I think, to illness." She handed the cup to Fiona. "You need to keep your strength up. Try to get some of this into the little one too, if you can." The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Fiona managed to coax a few spoonfuls of broth between Abigail's parched lips, but the baby remained listless, her breathing growing more labored as afternoon faded into evening. Other neighbors stopped by, word having spread about the cowboy's mission and the baby's condition. Some brought food or offered to sit with Fiona, gestures that touched her deeply after days of closed doors. As dusk settled over Fort Benton, Fiona sat by the window, Abigail cradled against her shoulder, watching the western trail for any sign of riders. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, and her arms ached from holding her daughter, but she refused to relinquish her vigil. "Please, God," she prayed softly, "let them come in time." The sound of hoofbeats on the hard, packed earth jerked her from a half-doze. Fiona stood, heart pounding, and moved to the door. Two riders approached through the gathering darkness, a man and a woman, their horses clearly exhausted. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Nathan's broad-shouldered form. He dismounted quickly, then helped the woman down from her horse. They spoke briefly before hurrying toward the cabin. Fiona opened the door as they reached the porch. "You came," she whispered, eyes filling with tears. "This is Dr. Elizabeth Wilson," Nathan said without preamble. "She's come to help Abigail." The doctor, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, immediately focused on the baby. "Let me see her, Mrs. Grey." Fiona relinquished her precious burden, watching anxiously as Dr. Wilson carried Abigail to the table, which offered the best light from the oil lamp. The doctor's examination was thorough but gentle, her experienced hands moving with confidence as she listened to Abigail's chest and checked her temperature. "Definite pneumonia," she confirmed grimly. "The infection's settled deep in her lungs. We need to act quickly." From her medical bag, she produced several bottles and packets, working with methodical precision as she mixed a solution. "This will help break up the congestion in her chest. We'll need to apply mustard plasters too and get her fever down." Nathan had remained near the door, his hat in his hands, watching the proceedings with intense focus. When Dr. Wilson requested hot water, he moved to the stove before Fiona could respond, stoking the fire and setting the kettle to boil. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Wilson directed their efforts with calm authority, showing Fiona how to apply the mustard plaster to Abigail's chest, then how to administer the medicine using a dropper. Nathan fetched water, built up the fire, and followed the doctor's instructions without hesitation, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of fear and activity. Near midnight, Dr. Wilson finally sat back, wiping her brow. "Her fever's coming down," she announced. "And her breathing seems a bit easier. We'll need to continue the treatment through the night, but I believe we've caught it in time." Fiona's legs nearly gave out with relief. She sank into a chair, trembling hands covering her face as tears flowed freely. "Thank you," she managed between sobs. "Thank you both. You should rest, Mrs. Grey," Dr. Wilson said gently. "You look ready to collapse. I'll watch the baby for a few hours." "I couldn't possibly. You're no good to your daughter if you make yourself ill," the doctor interrupted firmly. "There's a cot in the corner. Use it. I'll wake you if there's any change." Too exhausted to argue further, Fiona allowed herself to be guided to the small cot. She was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. She never slept this late before memory came rushing back. She sat up quickly, eyes searching for Abigail. Her daughter lay in a makeshift bassinet near the stove, small chest rising and falling with much easier breaths than the night before. Dr. Wilson sat nearby in Fiona's rocking chair, sipping from a cup. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. Her fever broke around 3 in the morning. the doctor said quietly, noticing Fiona's wakeful state. She's taken some milk and kept it down. The medicine is working. Fiona hurried to kneel beside the bassinet, laying a gentle hand on Abigail's forehead. The terrible heat was gone, replaced by the normal warmth of healthy skin. Abigail's cheeks had lost their alarming flush, and though she still coughed occasionally, the sound was looser, less desperate. "She's really better," Fiona whispered, fresh tears these of joy springing to her eyes. "She's not out of danger completely," Dr. Wilson cautioned. "Pneumonia can be stubborn. But yes, she's responding well to treatment. I've left medicine and instructions. You'll need to continue with the drops every 4 hours and the plasters 3 times a day." Fiona nodded eagerly, willing to do anything to ensure Abigail's recovery. "Where is Mr. Calloway?" "He went to tend to our horses and find some breakfast." "The man rode nearly 80 miles in 24 hours. He needs food and rest." Fiona's admiration for the cowboy deepened. "I don't know how I can ever repay either of you." Dr. Wilson shook her head. "I'm a doctor. This is what I do. As for payment, we can discuss that later when your daughter is fully recovered." The door opened then, and Nathan entered, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. His face showed the strain of his journey, deep shadows under his eyes, lines of fatigue etched around his mouth, but he managed a small smile when he saw Fiona. "Mrs. Peterson sends breakfast," he said, setting the basket on the table, "and her congratulations on Abigail's improvement." "News travels fast," Dr. Wilson remarked, rising from the rocker. "Small town," Nathan replied with a shrug, "especially when half the neighbors were worried enough to check on the baby throughout the day yesterday." Fiona felt a surge of gratitude for the community that had finally opened its doors to her. "Please, both of you, eat something. You must be exhausted." They shared a simple meal of biscuits, ham, and coffee, speaking little but comfortable in each other's company. Abigail slept peacefully nearby, occasionally making small baby sounds that reassured Fiona of her improving condition. After breakfast, Dr. Wilson announced her intention to stay another day to monitor Abigail's progress. "I've sent word to Sun River that I'll be delayed," she explained. "My assistant can handle minor matters until I return." Nathan, however, seemed restless, his eyes frequently moving to the window. "I should head back to Mrs. Peterson's," he said finally, rising from the table. "I've imposed long enough." "Imposed." Fiona stood as well, disbelief coloring her voice. "Mr. Calloway, Nathan, you saved my daughter's life. You're welcome in my home for as long as you wish to stay." Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or some deeper emotion she couldn't identify. "I'm glad the little one is doing better," he said simply. "Dr. Wilson will ensure she makes a full recovery." Before Fiona could respond, he nodded to them both and headed for the door, settling his hat on his head as he went. "Nathan," Fiona called, following him onto the porch. "Please wait." He paused, turning back to her with a guarded expression. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "What you did, riding through the night like that, no one has shown me such kindness since my husband died." The mention of her husband seemed to stiffen his posture slightly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she corrected gently. "They wouldn't. I went to a dozen doors before Mrs. Peterson sent you to me. No one else was willing to help." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'm just glad I was there." "Will you come back?" The question surprised even her, emerging unbidden. "To check on Abigail's progress, I mean." Nathan studied her face for a long moment. "I'll be around Fort Benton for another week or so before I head south with a cattle drive. I'll stop by." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and strode away, his tall figure soon disappearing around the bend in the road. Dr. Wilson appeared in the doorway behind Fiona. "Interesting man," she commented. "Not many would ride 80 miles for strangers without a second thought." "Do you know him well?" Fiona asked, returning inside to check on Abigail, only by reputation. "He drives cattle between Montana and Wyoming, works as a hunting guide sometimes, keeps to himself mostly, but he's known to be reliable." The doctor gave Fiona a thoughtful look. "And apparently he has a soft spot for mothers and babies in distress." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just grateful he was willing to help." Dr. Wilson hummed noncommittally, a knowing expression crossing her face. The next 3 days passed in a blur of recovery and rest. Abigail improved steadily under Dr. Wilson's care, her cough loosening and her appetite returning. By the time the doctor prepared to leave for Sun River, the baby was sitting up in her bassinet, playing with a wooden spoon and babbling happily. "Continue the medicine for another 3 days, doctor." Wilson instructed, packing her supplies. "Keep her warm, but make sure the room isn't stuffy. Fresh air is important for healing lungs." "I don't know what would have happened without you," Fiona said. Embracing the older woman impulsively, Dr. Wilson returned the hug with surprising warmth. "You're a good mother, Fiona. Trust your instincts." She hesitated, then added, "And perhaps trust that cowboy of yours, too. Good men are rare on the frontier." "He's not my cowboy," Fiona protested, blushing. The doctor merely smiled. "We'll see about that after Dr. Wilson's departure. Life slowly returned to normal. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance now stopped by regularly, bringing food or simply visiting. Mrs. Peterson became a daily fixture, cooing over Abigail and sharing town gossip with Fiona, but Nathan Calloway did not return. 5 days passed with no sign of him. Fiona tried to hide her disappointment, telling herself that his promise to visit had been mere politeness, nothing more. Yet each time hoofbeats sounded on the path to her cabin, her heart leapt with hope, only to sink again when the rider proved to be someone else. "He's a busy man," Mrs. Peterson said when Fiona finally worked up the courage to ask about him. "Been helping the Donovan Ranch prepare their herd for the drive south. Hardly seen him myself except at supper." "Of course," Fiona nodded, pretending indifference. "I just wanted to thank him properly." Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "He'll be leaving day after tomorrow. The cattle drive can't wait any longer with winter coming on." The news sent an unexpected pang through Fiona's chest. Ridiculous, she scolded herself. She barely knew the man. Yet the thought of him disappearing from her life without even a goodbye left her feeling strangely bereft. That evening, as she sat by the fire mending a shirt for one of her customers, a knock sounded at the door. Abigail, now fully recovered and playing on a blanket nearby, looked up at the sound, her little face brightening with interest. Fiona set aside her sewing and went to the door, trying to temper her expectations. It was probably just Mrs. Peterson with more soup or Mr. Jenkins returning the shirts she'd repaired. But when she opened the door, Nathan Calloway stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Good evening, Mrs. Grey," he said, his deep voice sending an unexpected shiver through her. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she managed, stepping back to let him enter. "Please come in." He ducked through the doorway, his tall frame seeming to fill the small cabin. His eyes immediately sought out Abigail, a smile lifting the corner of his mouth when he saw her healthy appearance. "She looks good," he said softly. "The medicine worked then?" "Yes, Dr. Wilson says she's completely recovered." Fiona watched as Nathan knelt beside the blanket, offering a finger to Abigail, who grabbed it with delight. "She saved my daughter's life, as did you." Nathan shook his head slightly, still focused on the baby. "Dr. Wilson did the real work." "She wouldn't have been here without you," Fiona insisted. "Nathan, what you did—" "I brought something for her," he interrupted, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small wooden horse beautifully carved with flowing mane and tail. "Made it myself." Not much of a carver, but thought she might like it. Fiona's heart constricted at the simple gift. "It's beautiful," she whispered, watching as he placed it gently in Abigail's eager hands. The baby immediately brought it to her mouth, gumming the smooth wood happily. "Mrs. Peterson said you're leaving soon," she said after a moment, moving to put on coffee. "Heading south with cattle," he nodded, rising to his full height again. "Wyoming first, then possibly Colorado. The ranch I'm working for is expanding their operation." "That sounds like an adventure." She kept her voice light, hiding the disappointment that welled up inside her. "It's a job," he replied with a shrug. "Been driving cattle since I was 16. Not much adventure left in it for me." They fell into surprisingly easy conversation as the coffee brewed. Nathan told her about his childhood in Kansas, his years working ranches across the Western Territories. Fiona shared stories of her life in Pennsylvania before coming west with her husband, their dreams of building a new life in Montana territory. Daniel was so certain we'd find prosperity here, she said softly, remembering her late husband's enthusiasm. He took work in the silver mine right away, said we'd save enough for our own ranch within 5 years. The accident happened in the mine, Nathan asked gently. She nodded. Cave in. 4 men died that day. She glanced at Abigail, who had fallen asleep on her blanket, the wooden horse still clutched in her tiny fist. She was just a month old, barely knew her father. I'm sorry, he said, and the simple words carried genuine feeling. Losing someone like that, it leaves a hole that's hard to fill. Yes, she agreed, studying his face. You've known loss too. He didn't answer directly, but his eyes took on a distant look. We all have our scars out here. As the evening wore on, Fiona found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, thoughtful man. There was a depth to him that belied his cowboy appearance, a gentleness that contrasted with his weathered exterior. When he finally rose to leave, she felt an almost physical pull to ask him to stay longer. Instead, she said, I wish you safe travels, Nathan, and thank you again for the gift. Abigail will treasure it. He stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand, seeming reluctant to depart. I enjoyed our talk, Mrs. Grey. Fiona, she corrected softly. Please call me Fiona. Fiona, he repeated, her name sounding rich in his deep voice. He paused, struggling with words. I wish you and Abigail the best. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that left Fiona standing alone in her cabin, a strange emptiness settling around her. The next day passed in a fog of routine tasks and nagging regret. Fiona couldn't shake the feeling that something important had slipped through her fingers, some opportunity lost that might never come again. She found herself staring out the window more often than not, her sewing neglected in her lap. You're mooning worse than a schoolgirl, Mrs. Peterson observed when she stopped by with fresh bread. Why don't you just go talk to him before he leaves? Fiona felt her cheeks flush. I don't know what you mean, Pshaw, the older woman scoffed. I've seen how your face lights up whenever his name is mentioned. And Nathan's been walking around like a man who's lost something precious but is too stubborn to go looking for it. He's leaving tomorrow, Fiona reminded her, trying to sound practical. What would be the point? Mrs. Peterson fixed her with a stern look. The point, my dear, is that life is too short and too hard out here to waste chances at happiness. Take it from an old woman who's seen too many regrets. The words stayed with Fiona long after Mrs. Peterson had gone. As dusk settled over Fort Benton, she made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She bundled Abigail warmly and walked to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, her heart pounding with each step. What if he rejected her? What if she was misreading everything, Mrs. Peterson answered her knock with a knowing smile. He's out back chopping wood for my winter supply, insisted on doing it before he leaves. She took Abigail from Fiona's arms. Go on, I'll watch the little one. Fiona walked around to the back of the house, where the steady thunk of an axe splitting wood guided her. Nathan stood with his back to her, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the evening chill, muscles flexing as he brought the axe down with practiced precision. She watched for a moment, gathering her courage before calling his name. He turned quickly, surprise evident on his face. Fiona, is everything all right? Is Abigail? She's fine, Fiona assured him, stepping closer. She's with Mrs. Peterson. I needed to speak with you before you leave. He set the axe down, giving her his full attention. The fading light cast shadows across his features, making them harder to read. I know this is forward of me, she began, her carefully prepared speech deserting her. And I understand if you think it inappropriate, but she took a deep breath. I don't want you to go without knowing that you've come to mean something to me, to us, Abigail and me. Nathan stood very still, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. I'm not asking for promises, Fiona hurried on, words tumbling out now. I know you have your life, your work. But perhaps when you return in the spring, if you were inclined to call on us. Fiona, he interrupted softly, taking a step toward her. I've been fighting with myself since the moment I met you, her breath caught. Fighting against what I'm feeling. His voice was low, almost rough. I told myself it wasn't right, you're still grieving your husband, you have a child to consider. I told myself I have nothing to offer a woman like you. That's not true, she whispered. He shook his head. I'm a cowboy, Fiona. I don't own land or a house. I follow the herds, take whatever work comes my way. Do you think I care about that? She asked, finding her courage. You rode 40 miles through the night to save my daughter. You carved her a toy. You've shown more character in 1 week than most men do in a lifetime. The last rays of sunlight caught his eyes as he studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him because his expression softened. I've been trying to find a reason to stay, he admitted quietly, to not take this job. But I gave my word to the rancher, and the men are counting on me to guide them south. Hope rose in Fiona's chest. But you'll come back. If I had something to come back for, he said, a question in his voice. You do, she answered simply. The distance between them vanished as Nathan crossed to her in 2 long strides. His hand, calloused from years of rope and reins, was surprisingly gentle as it cupped her cheek. I'll come back, he promised, his eyes holding hers. In the spring. I'll be here, she whispered, her heart thundering in her chest. We both will. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, the careful exploration of 2 people who had known loss and were wary of hope. But it deepened quickly, becoming a promise of possibilities neither had dared to imagine just days before. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I should have knocked on your door days ago, he said ruefully, instead of wasting what little time we had. We'll have more, she assured him, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When you return. They walked back to Mrs. Peterson's house hand in hand, finding the older woman rocking Abigail by the fire, a smug smile on her weathered face. Well, it's about time, she declared, taking in their linked hands and flushed faces. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you 2 in the root cellar to make you see sense. Nathan laughed, the sound warm and rich in the cozy room. Thank you for your patience, Mrs. Peterson. The evening passed too quickly. Filled with conversation and shared smiles, the 3 adults taking turns holding Abigail, who seemed delighted by all the attention. When it was time for Fiona to return home, Nathan insisted on accompanying her and Abigail back to their cabin. I'll come by in the morning before I leave, he promised as they stood on her porch. The drive heads out at noon. Fiona nodded, trying to be brave. We'll be waiting. His goodbye kiss was tender, lingering, a seal on the promise between them. Morning came with a crisp clarity typical of autumn in Montana. Fiona dressed with special care, braiding her auburn hair and donning her best dress, the blue one she rarely wore for fear of soiling it during her daily chores. Abigail, sensing her mother's excitement, was unusually cooperative, gurgling happily as Fiona dressed her in a clean gown. Nathan arrived as promised, leading his horse Thunder and carrying a small package. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance as well. His dark hair was neatly combed, his shirt and kerchief fresh. For the journey, Fiona said, handing him a parcel of food she'd prepared, bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. And to remember us by. His smile was tender as he accepted it. As if I could forget. He handed her the package he'd brought. This is for you. Open it after I've gone. They shared coffee and a light breakfast, the conversation flowing easily despite the impending separation. Abigail babbled in Nathan's lap, tugging at his kerchief with determined little fingers, drawing laughter from both adults. All too soon, it was time for him to leave. The goodbye was both harder and easier than Fiona had feared, harder because the connection between them had grown so strong in such a short time, easier because they both believed firmly in his return. Spring isn't so far away, she said as they stood by his horse. The winter will pass before we know it. I'll write, he promised. Send letters when I can. And I'll reply, so you'll have something waiting when you return to Fort Benton. He kissed her one last time, then swung up onto Thunder with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Abigail, secured in Fiona's arms, reached toward him with a plaintive sound. I'll be back, little one, he assured the baby, leaning down to touch her soft cheek. You take care of your mama for me. With a final touch of his hat brim and a smile that carried both regret and promise, Nathan turned his horse and rode away. Fiona and Abigail stood watching until his figure disappeared from view, the dust settling on the trail behind him. Back inside the cabin, Fiona finally opened the package Nathan had given her. Inside was a small hand-carved wooden frame holding a daguerreotype. It showed Nathan, standing tall and solemn in his best clothes, clearly taken recently at the photographer's studio in Fort Benton. A note accompanied it, the handwriting careful but unpracticed, for Abigail so she might remember the face of a man who will always come when she needs him. And for Fiona, a poor substitute for my presence until spring brings me home to you both. Tears blurred Fiona's vision as she traced the beloved features in the image. She set the frame carefully on the mantel where she could see it from her rocking chair. "He'll be back, Abigail," she whispered to her daughter, "and when he returns, our lives will truly begin." The winter of 1876-1877 proved to be one of the harshest in Montana Territory's memory. Snow fell early and deep, turning Fort Benton into a landscape of white broken only by the smoke rising from chimneys and the occasional brave soul venturing out for supplies or to check on neighbors. Fiona found herself unexpectedly blessed during these difficult months. The community that had once held her at arm's length now embraced her as one of their own. Mrs. Peterson visited nearly every day, bringing gossip and companionship. Mr. Jenkins, the shopkeeper, extended credit when money grew tight and even delivered goods himself when the snow was too deep for Fiona to venture out with Abigail. True to his word, Nathan's letters arrived sporadically throughout the winter, carried by the irregular mail service that braved the mountain passes. His words, simple and heartfelt, became Fiona's treasures: accounts of the cattle drive, descriptions of Wyoming's rugged beauty, stories of the men he worked with, and always, always, his thoughts of her and Abigail. "I watch the stars at night and wonder if you see the same ones," he wrote in one letter. "The men tease me for my quiet spells, but my thoughts are full of a cabin in Fort Benton and the two who wait for me there." Fiona wrote back faithfully, filling pages with news of Abigail's development, her first tooth, her attempts at crawling, the way she reached for Nathan's photograph when Fiona showed it to her. She described the town's winter activities, the Christmas celebration at the small church, the quilting circle she joined. "Mrs. Peterson insists on teaching me to cook properly," she wrote. "She says a cowboy works up a mighty appetite and I'd best be prepared. I suspect she's already planning our wedding feast, though I've told her we've made no such arrangements." As February gave way to March, the first hints of spring began to appear. The massive snowdrifts shrank gradually, revealing mud and eventually patches of green. The Missouri River, frozen solid for months, began to break up with thunderous cracks that echoed through the town. April brought warm winds and the first wildflowers. Abigail, now over a year old, took her first wobbling steps in the small yard behind the cabin, squealing with delight at her newfound mobility. Fiona's heart swelled with pride and a bittersweet wish that Nathan could have witnessed this milestone. His letters had mentioned a return in late April or early May, depending on the spring calving season and his employer's needs. As the days lengthened, Fiona found herself watching the Western Trail with increasing frequency, hope rising each time a rider appeared, only to be temporarily dampened when it proved to be someone else. "Patience, dear," Mrs. Peterson counseled. "The man gave his word, he'll be here." On the first truly warm day in May, Fiona was hanging laundry in the yard, laughing as Abigail helped by pulling at the sheets trailing on the ground. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pause, hand frozen in the act of securing a clothespin. A familiar dun gelding appeared around the bend, its rider's face breaking into a wide smile as he spotted Fiona and Abigail in the yard. Nathan looked sun-darkened and lean after his months on the trail, but his blue eyes were bright with joy as he urged Thunder into a trot. "Nathan." Fiona couldn't contain her cry of happiness as she scooped up Abigail and hurried toward the approaching rider. He dismounted in one fluid motion, covering the remaining distance between them in long strides. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, drinking in the changes wrought by months apart. "You're here," Fiona whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I promised," he replied simply, his voice husky with emotion. Abigail, recognizing the man from the photograph she'd been shown so often, reached for him with eager hands. Nathan took her carefully, his eyes widening as she patted his face with delighted recognition. "She's grown so much," he marveled, bouncing the giggling child in his arms. "And she's walking. Just started last month," Fiona confirmed, her heart nearly bursting with happiness at the sight of them together. "She's been keeping me busy." Nathan gazed at Abigail with wonder, then at Fiona with something deeper, more profound. "I thought about this moment every day," he admitted. "Coming back to you both, it got me through some mighty cold nights." "We thought of you too," Fiona said softly. "Every day." He shifted Abigail to one arm and reached for Fiona with his free hand, drawing her close. The kiss they shared was different from their goodbye, not tinged with sadness or uncertainty, but full of joy and promise. "Welcome home," she whispered against his lips. The days that followed were filled with a happiness Fiona had never dared to imagine after Daniel's death. Nathan settled into Fort Benton with surprising ease, taking a job breaking horses for the livery stable and helping neighboring ranchers with spring roundup. He rented a small room at Mrs. Peterson's but spent most evenings at Fiona's cabin, building a relationship not just with her but with Abigail as well. The little girl adored him, toddling after him with determined steps and raising her arms to be lifted whenever he entered a room. Nathan showed infinite patience, teaching her simple games and carving more wooden animals to add to her growing collection. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Abigail playing at their feet, the conversation flowing easily between them as they shared the parts of their lives that letters couldn't fully convey. "I've been saving," Nathan told her one such evening in late May. "From my wages on the drive and what I'm earning now, it's not much yet, but I'm hoping by next year to have enough for a small piece of land." Fiona's heart quickened. "Land here in Montana," he nodded, his expression earnest in the fading light. "A man at my age should put down roots. Find something more permanent than driving other men's cattle." "Is that what you want?" she asked carefully. "To settle in one place?" His eyes held her steadily. "What I want is a life with you and Abigail, if you'll have me." Though they had exchanged words of affection in their letters, and since his return, this was the first direct mention of a future together. Fiona reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I think we would like that very much," she said softly. Nathan's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I know I'm not offering much. I'm still a cowboy with calloused hands and more experience with horses than proper society." "You're offering everything that matters," Fiona assured him. "Kindness, honesty, a good heart. What more could I ask?" He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I want to do right by you, Fiona, and by Abigail. I know I can never replace her father." "You don't need to replace anyone," she interrupted gently. "You have your own place in our hearts." They were married in Fort Benton's small church on a perfect June morning. Dr. Wilson made the journey from Sun River to attend, bringing a beautiful hand-knit blanket for Abigail as a gift. Mrs. Peterson cried unashamedly throughout the ceremony, declaring afterward that she'd known from the first moment they were meant for each other. Fiona wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Nathan, in a proper suit that clearly made him uncomfortable but which he wore with dignity for her sake, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle, Abigail toddling beside her in a matching blue dress. "I, Nathan, take thee, Fiona, to be my wedded wife," he vowed in a clear, steady voice that carried throughout the small church. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Fiona repeated the same vows, her voice trembled with emotion, but her eyes never left Nathan's face. The gold band he placed on her finger had belonged to his mother, the one family heirloom he had carried with him through his years of wandering. After the ceremony, the entire town gathered for a celebration at the community hall. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, the community coming together to welcome the new family in their midst. "Look at them," Dr. Wilson commented to Mrs. Peterson as they watched the newlyweds dancing. Abigail perched on Nathan's hip, her little face alight with joy. "Who would have thought a baby's illness would lead to this?" Mrs. Peterson nodded sagely. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." "Though I'll take some credit for sending Nathan to her door that night," Dr. Wilson laughed. "As well you should. It's not every day a cowboy rides through the night to fetch a doctor for strangers." "Not strangers anymore," the older woman observed with satisfaction. "Family." Later that night, after the celebration had ended and they had returned to Fiona's cabin, now their home, Nathan carried Abigail, sleepy from all the excitement, to her bed. Fiona watched from the doorway as he tucked the blankets around her with gentle hands, then bent to kiss her forehead. "Sleep tight, little one," he whispered. "Papa's here." The simple words brought tears to Fiona's eyes. When he turned and saw her expression, Nathan crossed to her quickly, concern etched on his features. "Fiona, what's wrong?" She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. She's been calling you Papa for weeks now, but hearing you say it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He drew her into his arms, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that name." "You already do," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "You have since the night you rode for help without a second thought." As they stood together in the soft lamplight of their home, the past and future seemed to merge into a perfect present, a moment of completion neither had dared to hope for, when fate first brought them together on a desperate night months before. Outside, the Montana sky stretched endless and star-filled above Fort Benton. Inside, a family that had been forged through courage, compassion, and love settled into the first night of their new life together. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted across the meadow as Fiona stepped onto the porch of their ranch house, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. The sight that greeted her made her smile. Nathan on horseback, 6-year-old Abigail seated proudly in front of him on the saddle, while their 3-year-old son, Daniel, watched from the fence with Mrs. Peterson. "Higher, Papa, higher." Abigail called as Nathan urged the horse into a gentle trot around the corral. "That's plenty high enough, young lady," Nathan replied with a laugh, his arm secure around his daughter's waist. "Your mama would have my hide if I let you gallop before you're 7. I'm almost 7. Abigail protested, though her giggles undermined her serious tone. 3 more months, Nathan reminded her, slowing the horse to a walk as they approached the fence where Daniel bounced with excitement. "My turn, my turn." The little boy chanted, his dark hair so like his father's flopping over bright green eyes that were unmistakably Fiona's. "Just a short one for you, partner," Nathan said, lifting Abigail down before reaching for his son. "Supper will be ready soon." Fiona watched as Nathan settled Daniel carefully in front of him, the boy's face a study in concentration as he gripped the saddle horn with determined little hands. Mrs. Peterson made her way to the porch, her steps slower these days but her spirit undimmed. "Those children are the image of you too," the older woman observed, settling into the rocking chair that permanently resided on the porch. "Abigail has your spirit and Nathan's steady heart, and that boy is his father all over again except for your eyes." Fiona nodded, her heart full as she watched her family. "We've been blessed, haven't we?" "Indeed you have," Mrs. Peterson agreed. "Though I'd say you earned it after that terrible winter when Abigail was sick. I still remember how frightened you were." The memory, once so painful, had softened with time into a story they told often the beginning of their family's journey. "If Nathan hadn't come to my door that night." "But he did," Mrs. Peterson said firmly, "and look what came of it." The small ranch they'd built together over the past 5 years wasn't the largest or the grandest in the area, but it was thriving. Nathan had proven to have a natural talent for horse breeding, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest riding stock in the territory. Fiona contributed by keeping the books and occasionally teaching at Fort Benton's school when the regular teacher needed assistance. Their home, a sturdy log structure with 4 rooms and a wide porch, stood on a gentle rise overlooking a tributary of the Missouri River. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in spring, giving way to rich grazing grass in summer. In the distance, mountains rose blue and majestic against the vast Montana sky. Nathan completed Daniel's ride and dismounted, swinging the boy to his shoulders before helping Abigail collect the wooden toys she'd left scattered in the yard. Fiona watched them approach, struck anew by the quiet joy that had become the foundation of their lives. "Something smells mighty good," Nathan called as they neared the porch. "Please tell me it's your apple pie." "It might be," Fiona replied with a smile, "if certain little helpers haven't eaten all the filling." "I only had one spoonful, Mama," Abigail protested. "Daniel had two, did not." Her brother countered indignantly from his perch on Nathan's shoulders. "Did two children," Nathan said with mock sternness, setting Daniel down on the porch. "What matters is that there's enough left for after supper." "Right, Mama," Fiona laughed, reaching out to smooth Daniel's rumpled hair. "Barely. Now go wash up, all of you. Even you, Mr. Calloway, you're as dusty as the children." Nathan caught her hand as she turned to go back inside, pulling her gently into his arms. "Yes, madam," he murmured, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Whatever you say, Mrs." Peterson made a show of covering her eyes. "Land's sakes, you two are still like newlyweds. Children present, remember?" "We remember," Nathan assured her, though he kept his arm around Fiona's waist. "We're just setting a good example of marital affection." The children, accustomed to their parents' demonstrations of love, simply giggled and raced inside to wash for supper, Daniel's shorter legs working twice as hard to keep up with his sister. Later, with the meal finished and the children tucked into bed after stories and prayers, Nathan and Fiona sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The quiet moments at day's end had become their special time, a chance to share thoughts and plans without interruption. "I had a letter from Dr. Wilson today," Fiona mentioned, her head resting on Nathan's shoulder. "She's thinking of moving her practice to Helena. Says she's getting too old for the travel between settlements. She must be nearing 60 now," Nathan reflected. "She deserves to settle somewhere with more comforts." Fiona nodded agreement. She asked after Abigail specifically. "Says she'll never forget the night you rode into Sun River looking like you'd faced down the devil himself to get there." Nathan's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I was terrified we wouldn't make it back in time when I think how close we came to losing her." "But we didn't," Fiona reminded him softly. "Because of you," he shook his head slightly. "Because of us all, you fighting for her when everyone else turned away, Dr. Wilson knowing exactly what to do, even Mrs. Peterson sending me to your door in the first place." The mention of their elderly friend made Fiona smile. "She's still taking credit for matchmaking us, you know. Told me just last week that sending you to check on Abigail was the best idea she ever had." "She might be right about that," Nathan admitted with a chuckle. "Though I like to think we would have found each other eventually." Fiona considered this. "Perhaps Fort Benton wasn't so large that we could have avoided meeting forever, but would you have noticed a quiet widow with a baby?" "I'd have noticed you anywhere," he said, with such conviction that Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest. Even after 5 years of marriage, Nathan's unwavering devotion still had the power to move her deeply. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as Nathan pushed it with one foot. The sounds of night surrounded them, crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "I was thinking," Nathan said eventually, "about adding on to the house next spring. The children are growing fast and they'll need their own rooms before long." Fiona smiled, nestling closer into his side. "That seems wise, especially since we might need the extra space sooner than you think." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Nathan went very still, then turned to face her, eyes wide with surprise and hope. "Fiona, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile widening at his expression. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. Come winter, we'll have another little Calloway to love." The joy that spread across Nathan's face was something Fiona knew she would remember all her days. He gathered her into his arms with gentle reverence, as though she had suddenly become infinitely more precious. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Another child. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, drawing back to look into her eyes. "You and the children, you're everything to me, Fiona. Everything I never knew I wanted until that night I knocked on your door." The memory of that desperate night when a sick baby had brought them together no longer held fear. Instead, it had become the beginning of their story, the moment when fate had intervened to create the family now growing under their roof. "I love you, Nathan Calloway," Fiona said softly, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Thank you for riding through the night for us." His answer was a kiss filled with tenderness and promised the same promise he'd made on that porch 5 years earlier and renewed every day since. That whatever life brought them, they would face it together. Above them, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on velvet, bearing witness to a love born of courage and compassion, a love that had begun with a desperate ride through darkness and blossomed into the light of their shared life.